Hello, everyone. What is going on? Lauren Sisler here with AL.com, and I'm looking at the clock. It's 10:52. I look like I just woke up because I had a little bit of a snooze there on the couch after that one. Alabama winning 55-17 in their rematch against LSU. Matt Scalisi joining me now to talk about this matchup. I got sleepy face right now, a little sleepy face. The game kind of just went as we expected. Not much excitement there, at least from the LSU side of things. Alabama, though, lightened things up as we expected and putting some points on the board, putting some yards on the board. Mac-10 doing what he does best. DeVonta Smith, unbelievable performance. We'll get into that in just a minute, but just your overall thoughts on this game as Alabama clinched the SEC West and punched its ticket to the SEC championship game in 2 weeks against Florida.
Yeah, as I am sharing out the link to our show right now. Sorry. Lauren, I think we kind of came into this game expecting Alabama to win easily, but it's still, I think, again, around college football, people like competitive games. In Tuscaloosa, the fans just like to see their guys roll and do what they do best, and that's what they got to see today. And I think they got a little bit of extra enjoyment out of the fact that this was a game that stung them a year ago. It hurt to lose to LSU in that game. It was a streak against a rival that they valued a lot in Tuscaloosa. So breaking that streak was painful for Alabama, and watching LSU go on to win a national championship was painful for Alabama. I think a lot of Alabama fans thought that should have been our season. If Tua could have stayed healthy, that could have been our season last year. So, this year so far, everything seems to have gone Alabama's way. Obviously, they've had some adversity along the way. You lose Jalen Waddle. You're dealing with all the chaos around the rest of the season. But overall, this team has stayed pretty healthy. They haven't really struggled very much. They've had some minor things figuring out their defense, but for the most part, this just looks like one of those seasons that Alabama is the pretty clear best team in college football, and it's going to be tough for anybody to stop them, at least before the playoffs anyway.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that about a relatively healthy season, at 9-0. That's always the big thing with these games that gets me a little bit nervous when those big injuries pop up. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we saw Tua get injured in this game. I guess, was it two years ago, the knee injury? And, it's always a physical game with LSU. I'd be interested in kind of seeing how the players respond to that this year. And the physicality just didn't seem what we're used to seeing even when LSU and Alabama last year being a little bit different, but year in and year out, no matter the disparity between the two teams, it seemed like this game is really physical. But that's always one thing. You get to this point in the season, and granted, Alabama's had more time off this year because of obviously the built-in bye week, obviously the off week because of COVID, canceling this game or postponing it to tonight. So getting out without any significant injuries, certainly a big part of this. And just looking at the stat line, I mean, obviously huge night for Mac Jones, 20 of 28, 385 yards, 4 touchdowns. Najee Harris, big night for him as well, 21 carries, 145 yards, 3 touchdowns. I know there was some concern. He was holding his hands at the end of the game, but I guess they were talking about his hands being cold. He had them wrapped up in a heating pad. That's kind of what happens. Things get a little cold. And I'll be honest with you, I go back to last year. I had a couple games, Matt, that I covered out at Boise State. And it was interesting because it was like 28 degrees, and they didn't have any of the heaters on the Boise State sideline. It is 55 degrees, and Alabama had all their heaters on the sideline, like 4 games to go.
Hey, that's regional difference, That's in Alabama. This is as cold as we're used to. So
I know, and it's crazy. It's crazy when you think about that with having to adjust to that. So certainly interesting. Matt, I want to get your thoughts here. So DeVonta Smith, 8 catches, 231 yards, 3 touchdowns. Only twice since 2003 as a wide receiver. Had a Heisman finalist, and Matt Zenitz had tweeted that out, one of our reporters at AL.com, and just kind of the thought process there. Is there any chance in your mind that DeVonta Smith can come in and scoop up the Heisman, or do you think it's a little too late at this point?
I don't think that he's the legitimate contender to win the award, but I do think that he's made a case for himself as the season has gone on, that he's not only is he a guy that I think needs to be on a lot of people's ballots, and I think will be at this point, but I think this is a guy who might even have done enough for himself at this point to be a finalist. Now, obviously, I would normally phrase that as saying to get an invitation to New York. I don't know if that's how they're going to do it this year. They're doing everything kind of differently, it seems, in college football this year. I think at this point, there really isn't any debate as to whether DeVonta Smith is the best receiver in college football this year. He is going to get a Biletnikoff Award, which is becoming a pretty regular occurrence in Tuscaloosa at this point. That this was not a program before Nick Saban got here that was known for producing a lot of elite talent at receivers. I can't remember an NFL receiver that came from Alabama in my lifetime before Nick Saban arrived. And now it seems like they've got a guy going in the first round every single year at that position. I mean, they are, among many other things, Alabama is wide receiver U over the past decade. And DeVonta Smith may end up being the best one of those that they've had, certainly in terms of his collegiate career. Just the things that he's doing, the way that he's able to dominate in games, despite the fact that everybody knows about him at this point. It's not like he's some secret where we didn't know we had to cover that guy. Look, that's at this point, this guy is a known quantity. You have to do everything possible to keep the ball out of his hands, and nobody's able to do it. He continues to put up ridiculous stats and get wide open every single game. And I think right now, if you're Florida, if you're Clemson, Ohio State even, and you think you might have to play these guys in the playoffs, you're working on some kind of plan to shut down DeVonta Smith because he's just so dangerous. And I think Alabama has other weapons, but DeVonta Smith, if you're able to go up and do that,
yeah.
How do you stop that? Unless you put a 7-foot DB on him, I don't know what you can do to try and slow this down. This is just one of those players who is so in the zone and locked in on what he does that you kind of have to go into a game against him saying, look, we can't totally stop him. So let's just try to limit what he's able to do against us and maybe don't let him beat us any other way. Which unfortunately for LSU, they were not able to do tonight because Najee Harris also went off and ends up with 145 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns on the ground. So I think there's plenty of good excuses for losing to Alabama. It's tough. This is going to be a tough team to beat. But don't let them do everything on you. At least shut them down in one aspect if you can, I think, to try to make it respectable. LSU wasn't really able to do any of that tonight. Alabama threw when they wanted to throw, and they ran when they wanted to run.
and it definitely showed up on the sidelines. I'm sure you saw on Twitter the circulation of that Ed Ogeron video of him absolutely destroying the headset. And when I say destroying, I mean, I literally lit that sideline up, and I was like, oh, my goodness.
And RIP that headset.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And speaking of, it's Ed Ogeron in his post-game press conference, quotes coming down now. He said, I just told the team I thought they fought very hard. Number 6, Smith is one of the best players I've seen. So, certainly, calling it like he sees it, just a different year. And I mean, it's so weird too, being at home, watching these games, obviously not having the crowd. I mean, you're hearing every piece of language that's coming out of that game. I saw Malachi Moore, missed a play. You heard something come out of his mouth. It's interesting that you can hear everything that's going on, but it does bring you into the emotion. And in some ways, it kind of makes you feel like you have a front row seat to a practice, so to speak, because you're actually able to hear sort of what's going on. And
yeah, it's a unique aspect of this to not have crowd noise drowning out everything and being the soundtrack of the game itself. and I'm starting to get used to it a little bit. I'll never love it, and I'm excited for the day. Ultimately, one day when we get crowds back in stadiums, hopefully next season, that that big explosion of sound hits you when a big play happens, because it does take the wind out of things a little bit for that to not be there in these games. But it is interesting. At least Lauren, it reminds me a little bit of our experiences when we get to be on the sideline and suddenly you hear audio that you don't hear when you watch it at home. And you realize it's like, these are real human beings playing this game, and they're talking to each other the whole time. So it's cool that fans kind of get a little bit of an insight into that now.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, because I think sometimes you forget. I mean, they're not going to go out. They're playing with a lot of emotion, right? And so I think it is unique and interesting to see that and to kind of feel that. And it gives you a glimpse into sort of the other side of things that most fans, when sitting at home, would not necessarily be able to hear with the crowd noise. And, of course, obviously the technical difficulties on the CBS broadcast. I don't know if you guys saw that. Shout out to Jamie Erdahl, man.
Shout out to Jamie Erdahl.
Amazing.
She did great.
Having to do that. I've actually been told, hey, just be prepared. If the feed goes out, you're the only one on the field. So, because a lot of our crews aren't traveling this year. So nevertheless, pretty crazy stuff. Now, Alabama finished with 650 total yards after Bryce Young had the kneel down. That was the 7th most in school history. Mike Rodak tweeting that out for us. They passed 644 in 1989 as the most against SEC team. So, it obviously, much like we expected. I think I predicted this game maybe 49 to 20. It probably was a lot worse than that. I love this quote. I'm going to share this with you, Matt. So Nate Oates, the head basketball coach at Alabama, said, this is what he tweeted out. He said, DeVonta Smith is a bad man. This first half is ridiculous. We like scoring a few points in hoops, but they're on pace to outscore us tonight. So,
and they
good stuff.
Yeah, I think that Nick Saban will tell you that he doesn't do things for emotional reasons, but I think that that's not 100% true. And I think they left their foot on the gas a little bit longer tonight than they needed to, because this game was a statement for a number of reasons. I think there was some emotion involved that carried over from last year. But you have to remember that, especially in the SEC West, there is always an ongoing battle for the future, right? When you have an opportunity to show up somebody that you are recruiting against out on the recruiting trail regularly, you need to take advantage of that, because that means potential success for you in the future. LSU knew that a year ago. They won that game, and they walked over to the recruits that were at that Alabama game, and they said, come to LSU, right? And right now, Alabama is in a heated battle with LSU again for the top recruiting class in the country. Alabama, I believe, is ranked number 1 right now, and LSU's right behind them, number 3. So these are two programs that are recruiting head-to-head for a lot of the same guys. And Alabama, I think, took the opportunity tonight to say to recruits that were watching, hey, I know it feels like we both offer you a lot of the same things, but look at the results tonight and ask yourself if you think these two programs are the same. Is it really close, or are we actually a lot better than LSU? And look, that's a tough one. That's a tough one for Ed Orgeron to come back from. I think that's the biggest reason why having the kind of season that LSU's having this year is kind of a big deal. Normally you can say, look, we just won a national championship. No big deal. You're going to have some drop off, but they didn't just have some drop off. They're going to have a losing season the year after the national championship. And I think teams like Alabama, like Georgia, like Auburn are going to jump on that and say, hey, this program's heading down. You might should take a look at us instead.
Yeah, and I'd say that the video of Edo surfacing time and time again might be the overall 2020 narrative that it has been. That video on replay over and over
We've
and over.
had a moment like that this year, for sure.
So Matt, before I let you go, obviously, Alabama plays one more game next week, and then They will cycle over to the SEC championship game on December 19th to face Florida. Certainly, gearing up to be a good matchup, a good showdown between those two teams. Just kind of your thoughts as they get ready. What's one or two things that Alabama is really going to have to hone in on to go into that SEC championship game as strong as they can and come out with the win?
Yeah, and thank you, Okra Joe, for saying that win was better than a bowl of okra gumbo. I've never heard it called okra gumbo before, but I think many people will agree with your assessment there. I think that next week is going to be an important week for Alabama because Arkansas is a team that Alabama should easily beat, but they're a physical team and they are much more competitive than they've been in years past. Now, I don't think they're going to challenge Alabama. I don't think Alabama's going to sweat that game much, but you're going to take some hits in that game. Arkansas does not mess around, and they're not going to let you just run all over them, and they might actually be more of a challenge than LSU was tonight. So I think that game could keep Alabama on their toes a little bit, which isn't necessarily something that Saban hates going into the SEC championship. He's the guy who always would kind of rather his guys stay in rhythm than take a break before a big game. So that's next week. The week after that, I think right now it's important for a lot of reasons. I'm of the opinion right now that Alabama is going to be in the playoff, even if they lose to Florida in the SEC championship game. I think that they've done enough that they will have a spot, and it's essentially that game is about Florida having a shot to play their way into the playoffs. Right now, from what I see from Florida, I don't have a ton of confidence that game is going to I don't know that I'll say it won't be close, but I don't think that Florida has what it takes to beat Alabama. I think that they can certainly challenge Alabama's defense, but we saw today they struggled with Tennessee for a little while. I think they're a good team, but they have a lot more flaws and weaknesses than Alabama does, and you just can't really afford to have a big Achilles heel of any kind when you're playing Alabama. So right now, I think it's about keeping focus for Alabama. It's about staying in rhythm. It's about continuing to do the things that you do well and do it efficiently and get your win and get everybody out of there and stay healthy for the playoff run. I think that's really kind of the way you have to operate. It sounds like it's sort of taking things for granted and being lazy, but the truth is the faster you can get ahead and secure your win, the more likely it is that you bring all your starters with you to the next game. And I think that's kind of how Alabama has to be operating right now.
Yeah, no doubt. And looking at the schedule, so Arkansas next week, that's at Arkansas. And then, of course, SEC Championship on CBS, 7 o'clock kickoff, the time that I'm seeing there for that. So that's already been scheduled and announced. And I'm looking down the schedule here. It's kind of crazy to think Alabama opened the season against Missouri. The most points or the least amount of points they scored this year were 38 points, okay? And you climb up the chain and everything's been 52 points, 63, 41, 48, 41, 63, yep. 42, 55, on and on and on. It's pretty crazy.
It's the longest streak in the history of college football of scoring more than 30 points a game.
That's crazy. I mean, it's just climbing that ladder and obviously just has been unstoppable. And as I mentioned before, as you can tell, I was on the couch. I think I dozed off there for a few minutes and woke up. I woke up because you said they took could have taken their foot off the gas a little sooner. I woke up and was like, why in the world is Mac Jones still in this game right now? I don't get it.
Yeah.
Little bit foggy at the moment. But yeah, so all good stuff. Appreciate the insight as always. And of course, we'll turn the page to next week in this extended 2020 season as this is a game of makeup weeks for the SEC. And then we'll see how things shake out in the SEC championship game. We appreciate you. Thanks so much, Matty Ice. Get some sleep. Peace out.